that same Steve. He's still that. But now you're also seeing another side of him that he never had to show.
Telling people.
If you've ever looked at Steve Harvey and thought, man, that's success right there, you're not alone. The suits, the smile, the stage presence. Steve Harvey looks like the man who's got it all figured out. But what if I told you that behind all that charm, the jokes and the motivational talks, there's a story that's far from picture perfect? Because right now, the very world that helped build Steve Harvey's fame.
Telling people you work with, I don't want you even to be next to me. Like, I have such disdain for you that I'm annoyed by your presence.
The comedy world is turning against him. And what these comedians are revealing might just change the way you see Steve forever. So don't go anywhere, because by the end of this video, you might start wondering whether Steve Harvey really built his empire. Or borrowed it.
Presence.
His TV talk show.
Okay, this was the one he had on NBC just recently.
Whatever, yeah. The one that, damn, who took his show from him?
Kelly Clarkson.
How can Kelly Clarkson take your show?
Let's start at the top. Steve Harvey, one of the biggest names in comedy and television. You know the man, the host of Family Feud, The Steve Harvey Show, the Miss Universe pageant, and even the man behind those viral inspirational speeches that get shared all over the internet. He's a legend in many people's eyes, someone who came from nothing, worked hard, believed in himself, and made it all the way to the top.
By the way, this is the same guy who rails against people who don't believe in his particular voodoo.
Right? Against gay people.
Against gay people, against Asian.
But as it turns out, not everyone is cheering for Steve, because now, some of the people who knew him long before the fame are speaking out. And what they're saying paints a very different picture of the man behind the microphone.
Take your show.
I heard you go on the air and you said, my sister done burnt too many bridges, and there's nothing I can do for her now. Steve, do you know how hurt I was?
Steve, my thing with Steve Harvey is that he used my material on both his platforms.
Yeah.
After I talked to him, I saw him at Def Jam, I went up and talked to him, I said, man, you're using my material.
You see, Steve's story has always been about struggle and redemption. He's told the world that he was once homeless, that he slept in his car, and that faith got him through. But not everyone agrees with that version of events. Comedian Mark Curry, yes, the same Mark Curry from Hangin with Mr. Cooper, has come forward saying, that's not Steve's story. That's mine.
When I was a kid, interesting things, and I think about this all the time, is from the time Bernie passed till now, certainly I think society has changed. The way they digest entertainment has changed. So I think it would have been difficult. I think a lot of people would have had a hard time with some of the things that Bernie said.
According to Mark, Steve Harvey wasn't out there sleeping in cars or hustling in the way he claimed. In fact, Mark said Steve was making thousands every week doing shows while others like him were actually struggling.
You said that about
Borrow stories. He borrowed jokes. Now, in the world of comedy, there's one rule you never, ever break. You don't steal another comedian's material. It's the ultimate betrayal. It's like copying someone's soul, because every joke, every punchline, every story comes from personal experience and creates exactly what Steve Harvey did. In a resurfaced interview, Mark claimed that Steve used his exact Halloween story on his own talk show word for word. Mark said it wasn't just similar. It was identical. He even recognized the bit because it was something deeply personal from his own life growing up. And it doesn't stop there.
Somebody called me and said, man, homeboy doing your material. So he did my whole Halloween run. And I know he didn't think of it. You know, this is true stuff that really happened to me. And so my thing is, you don't have to do that, homeboy. Right. So, you know, motherfucker, you made enough money, bitch.
Bernie said in the GQ article that when he got Ocean's 11, Steve had reached out to the producers and said he thought he would be a better fit and tried to get the part and blah, blah, blah. And that was that, you know, you just...
Over the years, several comedians have whispered the same thing, that Steve Harvey built parts of his career on other people's material. That's a heavy thing to accuse someone of, especially a man who's become one of the faces of comedy in America. But when multiple comedians start saying it, and when fans start connecting the dots, it's hard to ignore.
This cat is hot. Please put your hands together for Cat Williams.
Saying you are not supposed to be at the gas station making life decisions.
Can't even pump gas like you used to no more.
If you put $15 in your tank, you had time to bond with your vehicle. You had time to put the nozzle in and
put the nozzle in there and hit it.
Set the clicker and look through your car and clean off the dashboard. And
be sitting there talking, be on your phone. Hey, what's happening? Be walking around, cleaning the windshield.
Run in the store, get some Pringles and a Snapper, and it'll still be pumping.
Okay, you go in there, bring me a wine cooler. Bring me a cooler, dog. Not no more.
You can't even turn around good for that son of a bitch click. As soon as you put it in, just click, click.
Get in there and start it up, and you can't believe that damn needle is a quarter tank of gas.
The same.
And trust me, the dots go deep. Let's rewind to the 1980s and 1990s, when Steve Harvey was still grinding in the comedy scene. Back then, he was just another hungry performer hitting every stage he could find in Chicago, in Atlanta, anywhere that had a microphone and an audience. But he wasn't alone. That era was stacked with raw talent, comedians like Bernie Mac, D.L. Hughley, Cedric the Entertainer, Monique, and later, Cat Williams. They were all fighting for the same dream, to make people laugh and to make a name for themselves. There was competition, sure, but there was also a bond, a sense of respect. Everyone knew the grind. Everyone knew the struggle. And that's why when people started saying Steve broke that unspoken code, it hit hard. Bernie Mac, for example, the late, great legend who stole the show in the original Kings of Comedy, was one of the most beloved comedians of his generation. Bernie had heart, humor, and authenticity that nobody could fake. But even Bernie had issues with Steve. According to reports and interviews from back in the day, Bernie felt betrayed. Steve actually called the producers trying to convince them that he would be a better fit for the role. Imagine that, your friend and fellow king of comedy, going behind your back to get your spot. And that wasn't the only time people said Steve pulled something like that. Cat Williams, another bold voice in comedy, has never been shy about his opinions. In one of his most famous interviews, Cat said straight up that Steve Harvey wasn't the king of comedy, he was the king of stealing jokes. Cat said, Steve built his career off Bernie Mac's back. And when you hear that from someone as outspoken as Cat,
he knows that Steve Harvey stole his Halloween bit because it was a personal story. He was talking about himself growing up.
He's not afraid to say what others won't. He even roasted Steve publicly, saying Hollywood never made room for a country bumpkin who looked like Mr. Potato Head. That might sound like typical Cat Williams shade, but the message was serious. He was calling Steve out for being fake, for pretending to be something he wasn't. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Because it's not just comedians like Cat and Mark Curry who've had something to say. Monique, one of the most talented and outspoken women in comedy, also had her own experience with Steve Harvey.
Comedians don't appreciate their jokes being stolen, and Steve Harvey has rubbed several comedians the wrong way. Well, it looks like Harvey has found himself in some trouble.
No Halloween costume. I think we UPS, I guess. I don't know. You've heard me say that every Halloween I had the same outfit on. I just had a brown box, and he just told me to tell everybody I was a UPS man. My material on his show, so I had a beef on that.
On what show?
When he was on the bullshit talk show he had, and he did all my Halloween material one Halloween.
It was public, messy, and emotional. When Monique spoke out years ago about being blackballed in Hollywood for refusing to play the Hollywood game, Steve went on live TV and told her she was wrong, that she needed to play by the system's rules. He told her that this was the money game, not the integrity game. Monique looked heartbroken when he said that, because she had thought of Steve as a friend, a brother in the business, someone who understood what it meant to stay true. But in that moment, she realized he wasn't on her side. That exchange became a viral moment because it showed two sides of Hollywood. Monique, who was standing for her principles, and Steve, who represented the system. And people started seeing a pattern. When you look at how Steve handled his relationships with other comedians, Bernie Mac, Mark Curry, Cat Williams, and now Monique, it starts to look like every time someone spoke up, Steve was already several steps ahead, protecting his image. And Steve's image is everything. Think about it: the clean suits, the polished speeches, the motivational talks about faith and family. He knows how to play both sides. He can talk to the streets one minute and charm Hollywood executives the next. Even D.L. Hughley, one of Steve's longtime friends and fellow
we going through something, we'll call each other because we feel for each other, because we know the real person.
Right, yeah.
I know they lying about you online. I know that podcast is bullshit. Hang in there, dog. Don't pay no attention to that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, look, man, just because you can talk smooth without saying it don't mean you ain't lying.
Right.
I be sitting up here looking at these podcasts of these other comedians that's going on talking about other comedians. Hold up, dog. Where did that shit come from? When did we become that? When did we get into tear each other down business? Because you ain't never heard me say not a disparaging remark against another comedian nowhere. You ain't heard him, or him, because we ain't cut from that cloth.
Right.
So why are you? What is your motive for doing this here? And you're not going to tear him.
Steve knows how to survive in any room. But that doesn't mean everybody likes how he does it. That's a subtle but powerful statement. Because in Hollywood, surviving and staying real don't always go hand in hand. Now, before we go deeper, if you're watching this right now, make sure you stay with me till the end, because the way this story unfolds will make you question a lot about how fame really works. Trust me, it's not what it seems. Let's get back to Mark Curry for a second, because his story really exposes the heart of this issue. Mark said he once saw Steve at a comedy show, confronted him face to face, and told him straight up, "Man, you're using my material." Mark said Steve brushed it off, but when he turned on the TV later, he saw his Halloween story being performed by Steve on national television. Imagine how that feels, watching your personal story being told by someone else on their show in front of millions without credit. That's the kind of thing that makes comedians lose trust in one another. And yet, through all of it, Steve kept rising. He hosted Family Feud and completely rebranded the show. He became the face of success and faith, writing books like Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man that sold millions of copies.
It was hot. We had the Steve Harvey show, so we had a national TV show. Bernie Mac was the it comedian at the time, and then DL was hot. He had a TV. But the first year we did it, it was just me, Bernie, and Steve.
Right.
And Steve closed.
You did the first part, the second part.
I think, of course, and that was, definitely a contributing circumstance.
Turned into a global motivational figure, giving advice to millions. But as his star rose higher, his connections to the comedy community seemed to fade away. One former radio crew member even said that Steve doesn't keep friends, he keeps opportunities. That line hits hard because it suggests that once you've served your purpose in Steve's world, you're done. And maybe that's the cost of success. Maybe Steve Harvey figured out something most people don't, that in show business, being good isn't enough. You've got to be ruthless, strategic, and willing to do what others won't. But that kind of strategy always leaves casualties. And that's exactly what's happening now. Those casualties, those broken friendships. Our Speaking Up. Cat Williams went on record saying that Steve Harvey isn't even who people think he is, that his famous hairline wasn't real, that his country boy charm was an act. He accused Steve of pretending to be relatable while secretly
like me, like Oprah, Tyler, Lee Daniels, and I gotta put my brother Steve on the list. Y'all knew I was not
chasing
wrong.
Hollywood status harder than anyone else. And when you think about it, Steve's career does show a pattern of reinvention: stand-up comedian, sitcom star, radio host, TV host, motivational speaker. He's changed his image so many times that even his closest peers can't agree on who the real Steve Harvey is. And then there's Bernie Mac, a name that still brings respect in the comedy world. After Bernie passed away, fans started revisiting his interviews and old clips. Some noticed that when Bernie talked about his life, he was humble, grateful, and honest about his struggles. But when Steve talked about Bernie, especially on big platforms like Oprah, there was always a strange tone, almost like competition. People started saying that Steve tried to position himself as the last man standing, the one true king of comedy. But fans never forgot who the people's champ was. Bernie Mac's legacy lives on because of his authenticity. And maybe that's why Steve's constant need to control his image bothers so many. Now, let's talk about Monique again for a moment, because that fallout revealed something important about how Steve thinks. When he told her that integrity doesn't pay the bills, people saw the real side of Hollywood, a side where doing the right thing doesn't always mean winning. And Steve wasn't just defending the system. He was admitting that he's part of it. He said in an old interview, "I've done things I ain't proud of, but when you're hungry, you eat what's in front of you." At the time, people thought he was speaking metaphorically. But looking back, it sounds like he might have been confessing something deeper, that he did what he had to do to climb, even if it meant stepping on others. And the truth is, Steve Harvey's journey does have that pattern: success, controversy, rebound, repeat. From the Miss Universe mistake that went viral worldwide, to the backlash over comments about women, race, and relationships, he always finds a way to bounce back. It's like nothing can stick to him. And maybe that's what makes him so fascinating. Because even when the truth comes out, Steve knows how to control the narrative. He once said, "If people believe you're blessed, they'll forget what you did to get there." That line tells you everything about how he plays the game. But can someone really build a legacy on bad karma and still sleep at night? Because while Steve keeps winning, hosting shows, cashing checks, delivering speeches, the whispers keep getting louder. More and more comedians are talking. Old interviews are resurfacing. And fans are starting to question the man they once admired. Because when you add it all up, the stolen jokes, the broken friendships, the shady deals, it paints a picture of a man who might have traded his integrity for success. Even D.L. Hughley, who's often defended Steve in the past, has hinted that not everyone in their circle sees Steve the same way anymore. D.L. once said, "You can't please everybody, but you can be real with yourself." And that might be something Steve struggles with. Because his brand is built on being the funny, faith-driven, family-loving man who's been through it all. But behind that brand, there's a trail of people who feel used, betrayed, or forgotten. Now, here's the thing. Nobody can deny Steve Harvey's talent. He's sharp, witty, and charismatic. He worked hard to get where he is. But at what cost? Because fame built on loyalty feels different than fame built on strategy. And the comedians who've spoken out, Mark Curry, Cat Williams, Monique, even Bernie Mac back in the day, they're all saying the same thing in their own way. That Steve Harvey plays the game better than anyone. But he doesn't play fair, so maybe this isn't just about Steve Harvey. Maybe it's about the industry itself, about how fame rewards those who can adapt, even if it means losing themselves in the process. Because, let's be honest, Hollywood isn't built for saints. It's built for survivors. And Steve Harvey, he's one of the best survivors comedy ever produced. But survival always comes with scars. And now, as more comedians step forward, those scars are showing. So what do you think? Did Steve Harvey really climb the ladder by stepping on others? Or are these just bitter voices trying to tear him down? Because at this point, it's not just one person saying it. It's a chorus of voices from different corners of comedy, all telling similar stories. And whether you believe them or not, one thing's clear. The image of Steve Harvey as the smiling, unshakable success story is starting to crack, And maybe that's what makes this story so powerful, because it reminds us that fame isn't free. Behind every success story, there's another story nobody wants to tell. The laughter might have built Steve's name, but it's the silence from his old friends that tells the real story. And as more comedians speak their truth, it's becoming harder to ignore. So stay tuned, because this might just be the beginning. When comedians like Mark Curry, Cat Williams, Monique, and others start pulling back the curtain, the truth always finds its way to the spotlight. And no matter how bright that spotlight shines, karma has a way of catching up, right on schedule. Now, before we move on, if you're still here watching, make sure you stick around till the end, because this story is about to get even deeper. We're not just talking about comedy beef anymore. We're talking about power, betrayal, and how fame can change people in ways you'd never expect. See, when Steve Harvey came up in the comedy world, he wasn't just chasing laughs, he was chasing survival. He said it himself many times. He wanted to make it out of the struggle no matter what. But what people are realizing now is that sometimes that kind of hunger can turn into something dangerous. Because when you're that focused on winning, you stop caring who you hurt to get there. Back in the 90s, when the Kings of Comedy tour happened, it was supposed to be a celebration of unity for legendary comedians Steve Harvey, Bernie Mac, Cedric the Entertainer, and D.L. Hughley. It was a dream team. Every night, thousands of fans packed arenas just to laugh until they cried. Bernie was the showstopper, raw, hilarious, and real. Steve was the host, the smooth one, keeping things moving. On stage, it looked like brotherhood. Off stage, not so much. Rumors have swirled for years that Bernie Mac and Steve Harvey weren't as close as people thought. In fact, Bernie once admitted in an interview that he felt Steve tried to undercut him during that time. Bernie said that after he landed his big Hollywood movie role. Steve allegedly called the producer and suggested he'd be a better fit. That's not just a misunderstanding, that's betrayal between two men who were supposed to have each other's backs. And when Bernie passed away, that wound never got to heal. Fans noticed that Steve's tributes to Bernie sometimes sounded more about himself than Bernie. There was always this underlying tone of competition, as if Steve wanted people to remember him as the true king of comedy. And that didn't sit right with fans. To this day, people say Bernie was the people's king, Steve was the TV king, and that difference says everything. Then there's Cat Williams. Now, Cat is one of those comedians who doesn't bite his tongue for anybody. He's called out Kevin Hart, Tiffany Haddish, and yes, Steve Harvey. Cat once said that Steve didn't deserve the King of Comedy title because real kings don't steal from their own people. Cat even mocked Steve's old sitcom, saying it was just a copy of Mark Curry's Hung In with Mr. Cooper. He claimed Steve watched Mark's show, took the concept, and turned it into the Steve Harvey Show. And when you compare the two, both featuring a sharp-dressed, funny, middle-aged man working at a school, you start to see why people might think Cat had a point. And speaking of Mark Curry, that man didn't hold back either. He said straight up that Steve stole his entire vibe, from his jokes to his stories to his show concept. Mark even said Steve used to come to his comedy gigs, watch his routines, and then perform the same jokes later on. When Mark confronted him, Steve didn't deny it. He just moved on like nothing happened. But let's be real, when someone as powerful as Steve Harvey takes something from you, what can you really do? Especially when the industry's already picked its favorite. That's the thing about Hollywood. Once someone's image is established, people don't want to believe anything negative about them. Steve had already become the face of family-friendly entertainment. Who would believe that the same man preaching about God, marriage, and integrity was stealing jokes and backstabbing friends? That's what makes this story so wild. Because for years, Steve's been telling us who he is, but now, it's the people who knew him before the fame are telling us who he really was. and it doesn't line up. Even D.L. Hughley, who's often stayed neutral, has thrown subtle shade. In one podcast, D.L. said, "Steve knows how to survive in every room." And when he said that, he didn't mean it as a compliment. He meant that Steve knows how to say whatever he needs to say to whoever's in front of him. That kind of flexibility is how you survive Hollywood. But it's also how you lose respect in the streets, because real recognizes real and fake stands out. Now, let's go back to Monique for a second. Because her situation with Steve wasn't just a disagreement, it was a breaking point. When she started calling out Hollywood for mistreating her after she won her Oscar for Precious, a lot of people stayed silent. But Steve went on national television and basically told her she was wrong for speaking up. He told her that standing on principles doesn't pay the bills, and that she needed to play the game to win. That moment said everything. You could see the pain in Monique's face because she realized Steve was more loyal to the system than to the truth. She said later that she loved Steve, but she couldn't understand why a man who built his brand on faith and loyalty would publicly tear her down instead of standing with her. And that's when fans really started to see the cracks. Because you can't talk about integrity on Sunday and then throw your sister under the bus on Monday. And Steve's reaction afterward didn't help either. Instead of apologizing or trying to make peace, he doubled down. He said he wasn't going to let anyone mess with his money or his brand. And that right there showed people that for Steve Harvey, it's not about right or wrong, it's about winning. But here's the twist. Even with all these accusations, Steve's career never slowed down. In fact, it got stronger. He kept landing bigger shows, bigger deals, and more endorsements. It's almost like the more people talk, the more successful he becomes. And that makes you wonder, does he know something about the business that others don't? Maybe he's mastered the art of turning controversy into currency. Remember when Steve made that mistake at the Miss Universe pageant? He announced the wrong winner on live TV, an embarrassment that could have ended anyone else's career. But somehow, Steve turned it into a joke, made peace with the world, and came back the next year to host again. That's power. That's control. And that's why, no matter what comes out, he always seems untouchable. But untouchable doesn't mean innocent. It just means powerful. And power in Hollywood is everything. Once you've got it, people hesitate to speak against you. And when they do, nobody listens. That's why it's taken so many years for these stories to come out. Because who wants to go up against Steve Harvey, a man with money, influence, and millions of loyal fans? Still, the truth always finds its way. And that's exactly what's happening now. From Mark Curry's interviews to Cat Williams' rants, to old footage of Bernie Mac talking about betrayal, the puzzle pieces are finally fitting together. And the picture isn't flattering. Even behind the scenes, some of Steve's former coworkers have shared their own experiences. People who worked on his radio show said he could be controlling, demanding, and cold once the cameras stopped rolling. They said Steve was all smiles in public, but ruthless in private, cutting off anyone who didn't serve his goals. Some even said that working for him felt like walking on eggshells, because one mistake could get you replaced, and maybe that's the real Steve Harvey, not the smiling host. Not the preacher, but the businessman who learned early that success doesn't care about feelings. Because when you listen to how he talks about success, he often says things like, "You got to be willing to do whatever it takes." And when you connect that to how he treated his peers, it suddenly makes sense. Now, before we wrap this up, let me ask you, how far would you go to make your dreams come true? Would you step on others if it meant building your empire? Would you borrow someone's story if it made you famous? That's the question at the heart of Steve Harvey's story. Because no matter how you feel about him, one thing's clear. He's proof that in this business, talent alone isn't enough. You've got to play the game. But how you play it, that's what defines your legacy. And Steve's legacy is complicated. On one hand, he's a success story from stand-up to stardom, from poverty to power. On the other hand, he's a symbol of what happens when ambition goes too far. Because for every motivational speech he gives, there's a comedian out there who feels robbed. For every prayer he says on TV, there's a peer who remembers the betrayal. Yet somehow, Steve keeps smiling, keeps preaching, keeps winning. Maybe that's his greatest talent. Not comedy, not hosting, but survival. Because no matter what people say, he always lands on his feet. And maybe that's why he'll always be controversial, because he's living proof that nice guys don't always finish first. And the ones who do aren't always the nicest. So, as the comedy world keeps talking and more people keep pulling back the curtain, one thing's becoming clear. The story of Steve Harvey isn't finished yet. The laughter may have built his empire, but it's the silence from those he left behind that's starting to tell the truth. Because at the end of the day, karma doesn't care about ratings. It doesn't care about fame or followers. It comes for everyone, even kings of comedy. And when it finally does, no amount of jokes, prayers, or suits can hide from it. So what do you think? Did Steve Harvey build his success by hard work alone, or did he climb over others to reach the top? Because as more voices speak up, Mark Curry, Cat Williams, Monique, D.L. Hughley, and the memory of Bernie Mac, the question gets harder to ignore. One thing's for sure, the laughter that once crowned him king might be fading, but the truth is just getting started. And as the spotlight shifts, it's not just shining on Steve Harvey, it's shining on the price of fame itself. So don't forget to drop your thoughts below. Do you think Steve's being unfairly judged? Or is this the karma everyone's been waiting for? Either way, the story's not over, and something tells me the next act is going to be even louder. Stay tuned, because Hollywood might have built Steve's image, but the comedians he left behind, they're finally ready to tear it down.